Well, welcome to Christian Answers. This is Pastor Jeff Short, here to lead another contemporary Christian issue in the news. And we're going to be talking about the question, are conservative Christians compromising on important moral issues in order to get along with the culture today? And this is a big issue because we're all tempted to compromise. We're all tempted to just shave a little bit off the truth, to trim the truth just a little bit so that we don't get into trouble, to save our skin, to get in good with the power that to be a part of those who make decisions and to have a place at the table. This happens a lot in the area of academia, education, Christian colleges, Christian seminaries. There's always a strong pull to try to tone down our Christian distinctive truths, to minimize conflict with the world, to fit in with the peers, academic peers, professors, researchers, authors, lecturers. There's always this pull toward the compromise. And are we seeing it with conservative organizations? And I think we are seeing some of this. We have to be careful and we have to make sure that we don't do that, because if we do, we will be part of the problem and not part of the solution. And what am I referring to specifically? Well, I just watched an episode of Pastor Doug Wilson's podcast where he was talking about a conversation between the public intellectual Jordan Peterson and a political commentator, Dave Rubin. Now, Dave Rubin is an openly homosexual, so-called married to another man, and yet he tries to be a conservative. He labels himself conservative. He takes conservative views on many issues, but on the issue of so-called gay marriage, he is actually participating in a so-called gay marriage. Well, as Christians, we know that that is an impossible ability. You cannot be married. Two men cannot be married. Two women cannot be married. There is one definition of marriage that was given by God. It's from the Bible. It's a man and a woman. Adam and Eve, placed in the garden in the beginning. God created man and he created woman, brought them together in the garden. Adam and Eve, first married couple, and that's the pattern. That's what Jesus Christ in the New Testament points back to when he's teaching on this subject. He says, don't you recall from the beginning, God made them male and he made them female, and the man shall leave his father and mother and become joined to his wife and become one. And that is the definition of a marriage. So Christians need to make that very clear and stand very strong on that. And we cannot compromise on that because that is a revealed truth. Now, there are lots of things in the conservative movement that are not revealed truth. They're not revealed in the Bible. For example, conservatives tend to favor stronger border policies, stronger border regulation, just the not allowing the flow of leaving and coming, people crossing the border willy-nilly at whatever point they want to. Conservatives tend to say that we need to be able to maintain a national sovereignty and we need to defend and protect ourselves against enemies. And so we need to have a strong border policy. But that is not something that is actually mandated from the Bible. You can actually make an argument from principles in the Bible, sort of an indirect way, but you cannot actually go to verse, chapter, and verse and say this is actually something that has to take place. We have to have a strong border policy. Here it says right here in the Bible. No, you can't do that. So we don't have revelation on that issue, the border. But we do have revelation as Christians on marriage. So there can be no compromise. None. We have to hold firm to that, whatever that price we have to pay to hold firm to that. Now, why do I bring this up? Because Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin have a conversation that's posted on the internet, and it's sponsored by the Daily Wire. That's Ben Shapiro's internet conservative podcast network that draws millions and millions of viewers. So it's a very highly successful conservative voice. And Christians generally agree with everything that is being put forth on that Daily Wire podcast network. But Jordan Peterson now is part of the Daily Wire. He has joined up, signed up, become a part of the Daily Wire team, and he's now sponsored on their website. And he sat down with commentator Dave Rubin and talked about the state of marriage in our culture today. And the conversation was not a conservative, consistent conservative or Christian message. What Jordan Peterson was basically saying to Dave Rubin, who is married, so-called, quote, I'll put it in quotation marks, married to a man, is that he said society operates best when there is a standard, and that is marriage is a man and a woman, operates best with that moral norm, that standard. And then Jordan Peterson goes on to say, but we have to give space to non-traditional forms of expressions, and we need to give space for non-conforming people who are in non-traditional types of marriages, and therefore he argues that society should have room for so-called gay marriage. Well, this is not a conservative voice. This is not a Christian voice. Now, I know a lot of people are saying, well, Jordan Peterson is not a Christian. That is true. Now, he claims to be a believer in God, and he claims to be a Christian in some sense, more of a symbolic sense, more of a figurative sense, more of a symbolic sense. He's highly into the philosophy of Carl Jung, and this symbolic consciousness, very esoteric kind of religion, almost Gnostic. But he claims to be a Christian in some sense, and yet he's arguing that our society has to make room for so-called gay marriage because we need to accommodate these non-conforming, fringe-type relationships. We can't just cast them aside. Well, no one's talking about casting people aside. We just simply say there is a definition of marriage, and there are definitions that are not marriage, that want to be marriage. They want to be called marriages. They want to be labeled marriages. They want to be given the status of marriage. They want to be given the honor and pride of place of marriage. And they want to receive the benefits in society of marriage, but they are not marriage. So two men living together can never, ever have a marriage because marriage is a union of a man and a woman. So Jordan Peterson, this brilliant public intellectual who has a lot of good things to say and is conservative on many points, although he comes at conservative from a different perspective. We have to understand, we have to step back and realize he is not coming to a conservative philosophy of society and life through a biblical understanding of truth. He is not coming at it the way a Christian would. For example, Christians are against abortion because we believe in the teachings of the Genesis accounts where God created man and woman in the image of God. Image of God he created, image and likeness of God. And so all human beings have dignity because they're created in the image of God. They're all humans, all persons have dignity because God brought forth that soul infleshed in human material. And so even the baby in the womb, the smallest of people have dignity, just as the oldest of people have dignity, or the tallest people, or the heaviest of people. All human beings have dignity because they're made in the image of God. And we get that from the Bible. So we are against abortion. We are against the killing of innocent children in the womb by their mothers. Now, You would think that you would never have to even say this. You would think that there would be enough maternal instinct and natural compassion and sympathy in the mother's heart that she would never, ever dare take the life of her child. In fact, she would go out of her way to protect and give her life to protect the life of her child, whether in the womb or outside of the womb. But no, we live in such a sinful, wicked, corrupt generation that mothers are now the chief threats to their children. The own mother, the mother of the child, is the number one enemy of the child in many cases. So society needs to protect the child from its own mother. We live in an insane, foolish world that's under the judgment of God. So as Christians, we arrive at our positions, our conservative, you want to call them conservative, I guess you could call them, in a world gone mad and crazy and insane. What we say is simply the Bible, but we're labeled conservative. So if you want to put the label conservative on us, fine. But we come at these issues from the truth of the Bible. And then only afterwards do we have other areas like plain common sense, using our minds and our rational faculties that God gave us. Again, we can make secular arguments for these things, but primarily they're based in the truth of God's Word. Well, Jordan Peterson doesn't come from that perspective. He is more of a secular person, and his conservatism comes from the standpoint mostly of evolution. And his argument is basically mostly that evolution is a process that has refined human existence and allowed the human species to exist and perpetuate and survive. And so we can't cast away what evolution has produced, and we can't cast away the products of evolution, because if we do, we put at threat our own species existence. And so he argues for a conservative approach to society and life based on the process of evolution and how the fine-tuning of evolution, how it's made us exist and survive all these many, many years, which is a vastly different basis for your conservatism. So I'm glad he's arguing for a conservative position, for example, on abortion or gender, the transgender movement, and some of these other issues, important issues. He's a powerful voice against the insanity, but his foundation is weak and feeble. And the only thing he has is just research and studies and human philosophy and human logic and human reason and just common sense honed to an academic fine point. So we welcome him into the ranks of conservatism, but we have to realize that because he's not on a biblical foundation, he is not going to make the strongest arguments. And in fact, he's sometimes going to go off the path. And he has, for example, on the issue of marriage. He says in this conversation that was presented on the Daily Wire. Now, again, that's disappointing that Ben Shapiro and company at the Daily Wire did not look at this video and say, wait, this is not a conservative view of marriage. Why isn't it a conservative view of marriage? Because Jordan Peterson is actually trying to argue a justification for gay marriage. That's not conservative. I'm sorry. You can be conservative on everything else, but if you're arguing for gay marriage, you're not conservative. You're not anywhere near biblical on this issue. In fact, you're anti-biblical. So this so-called conservative argument for gay marriage is a farce. It's a false, fake argument. And just to say, well, society needs to keep the traditional definition, man and woman, as the norm, as the standard, because that's what works 99.9% of the time. But we also have to accommodate those who want to stretch the boundaries of the definition of marriage and allow for the small percentage that want to enter into a gay marriage. No, if you have a law that permits gay marriage, you are changing the definition of marriage. You're not holding to the standard. The reason man and a woman relationship is the definition of marriage because it is the standard. And the reason we shouldn't allow any other definitions of marriage is because once you do, then the standard is no longer the standard. Then you have all kinds of other standards. And, you know, the big LGBTQ standard is love is love. So basically a tautology. You're just blabbering. You're saying the same thing. That isn't the standard. The standard has to be that a marriage equals a man and a woman. End of discussion. Now, if Jordan Peterson had started down some road like, well, we have to allow for some kind of civil partnership or civil union, okay, that might be more of a conservative argument. There might be room in society to allow people to have a license to live together in such a way that they can have insurance together or that they can have hospital visitation together. Certainly wouldn't want to see them adopt children together. Again, here's another compromise in the conservative movement. When this Dave Rubin, this homosexual who's married to a man, so-called married, it's a fake marriage or mirage, as the funny joke is today, is it's a gay mirage because it's not real. It's just false. It's a fake. When he and his so-called partner had a surrogate give them 2 babies, he announced it, and there were conservative groups who actually congratulated Dave Rubin and his so-called partner on having children. And one of the organizations, the leader, the president of Daily Wire, Jeremy Boring, actually sent out a tweet of congratulations to Dave Rubin on having 2 children. What? So now we're congratulating people who are violating the standard for marriage, who are in an illegitimate marriage. We're congratulating them for bringing children into that dysfunctional, sinful, immoral situation. And we're still conservative? We're calling ourselves conservative? No, we don't congratulate, we don't encourage, we don't empower people in their sinful lifestyle to try to imitate and duplicate marriage when it's a sham marriage. 2 men living together, it's a sham marriage. 2 women living together is a fake marriage. It's a false marriage. It's an illusion. It's a mirage, gay mirage. And we don't encourage it, and we don't congratulate them when they bring children into the mix, into the mess. Because now these 2 children are going to be raised in a very mixed up, dysfunctional household. Now, Jordan Peterson, the great public intellectual, so-called conservative commentator, he would not agree with me that the gay marriage situation is a mixed up mess. And he would try to encourage them to raise these children as best they can. But my point is that we shouldn't be even tolerating 2 men or 2 women to enter into a relationship and call it marriage. And we shouldn't even have laws on the books that even recognize it as gay marriage. And we shouldn't, as conservatives, be encouraging these illegitimate forms of marriage to incorporate children into them now, joining into the chaos and confusion. It will be a chaotic and confusing time for these children, no question about it. Now, Jordan Peterson would go on and say, trying to speak as a so-called conservative, he's trying to make an argument, well, if you are in one of these abnormal marriage arrangements like so-called gay marriage and you have children, then you have to go out of your way in a special way to try to give them exposure to the opposite sex that they don't have in the marriage and they don't have in the family. But again, he's trying to ad hoc correct a wrong situation from the beginning. They wouldn't have to try to compensate for a lack of opposite sex influence in these children's life if they were in the proper arrangement for marriage. But they're not in the proper arrangement for marriage. They're in a twisted, distorted, perverted arrangement for marriage. And now they have to bend over backwards and go way out and contort themselves and twist themselves to try to somehow bring a female influence into their children's lives, when if they had simply not entered into this illegitimate type of marriage and had simply had children in a more traditional marriage where the woman and a man, then they wouldn't have to try to bend over backwards to try to provide for these children, which they can't. The fact is they can't. They can't compensate for that. And Jordan Peterson seems to want to try to justify gay marriage as something that is a legitimate social entity, which is wrong. He needs to say, this is not right for individuals. This is not right for society. It'll tear societies apart. We have biblical precedent. He himself has lectured on Old Testament stories. He's lectured on different accounts found in the early chapters of Genesis. And he should know that Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed by God because of sexual perversion. So why is he trying to justify the Sodom and Gomorrah lifestyle and relationships and try to baptize it in using the term marriage, calling it non-traditional marriage, and trying to justify people in these relationships? He is not speaking a true conservative voice, because if you're trying to conserve the good of the past, which is what true conservatism is, anything in society, for example, that is good, true, and right, we want to conserve that, right? We'd be foolish if we didn't. If something is good, we want to conserve it. We want to perpetuate it. We want to promote it. And that's the whole philosophy behind conservatism. We certainly don't want to change it. What we need today, as far as marriage is concerned, is we need the strengthening of the institution of marriage. We need to encourage married couples to be faithful and to love one another, and point them to chapters, for example, 1 Corinthians 13, where Paul talks about love is patient and kind, and you go through there. It's often read at weddings. It needs to be read almost every day in the life of the marriage of a couple, and the couple being a man and a woman. We need to follow the pattern of the Bible, because that's the arrangement that God has given us. And not only that, as Jordan Peterson would more argue, that's the arrangement that has worked, that has allowed the human race to exist and continue on all these years. And so this perverse arrangement called gay marriage, this is some wacko, radical experiment in trying to mess with an institution that God gave at the very beginning when Adam and Eve were brought into the garden together. This is a foundational pillar of society, institution, marriage, and we cannot have conservatives arguing for alternatives to it, because that is not acceptable. And so we actually have conservatives, like I mentioned before, Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin. They're trying to argue a conservative case for gay marriage. They can't do it. And we need to stop promoting people like this, at least not promoting their videos when they're doing things like this. Now, Jordan Peterson, there's a lot of good that he's promoting. He is fighting some really good battles. But not all the battles and not all the positions he's taking are valid and true. And so we shouldn't be promoting his mistakes. We shouldn't be promoting Jordan Peterson's errors and his faulty thinking. Because once again, he's not coming at this from a biblical Christian truth standpoint. He's coming at it from an evolutionary, naturalistic perspective, sociological perspective. And because of that, he is going to go off the path. So as Christians, we need to let him speak when he's speaking the truth. But when he's not speaking the truth, we need to shut him down and not platform him and say, look, your argument is faulty, it's fallacious, it's wrong. And you're not arguing conservative values when you are trying to justify radical, perverse arrangements like gay marriage and so forth. And as Christians, we need to be vigilant in this. There are churches that are capitulating to this kind of thinking. There are Christians that are capitulating to this kind of thinking. In fact, there were Christians that tweeted out congratulations to Dave Rubin, to he and his partner, for having 2 children and bringing them into the world and hoping them the best and raising them. And this is inappropriate. We should be better hoping that they would find some good homes for these children where there is a man and a woman present, so that the boy or the girl can have the proper balance and proper emphases that come when you have it the way God designed it, male and female marriages. There's a reason, there's a brilliance, there's a wisdom in God having male-female marriages, covenant. And that is, it also, for many other things, it gives the child, whether it's a boy or a girl, a balanced perspective. He becomes aware that men bring something to the marriage and then women bring something to marriage different, and that in the combination of the 2 giftings, then something beautiful happens, and the proper emphases in raising the children become apparent. But if you have 2 men or you have 2 women, there's an imbalance. It's going to be lopsided. It's going to be distorted. It's going to be twisted. The children are not going to get, if it's a case of 2 men, they're not going to get the maternal care that they need. If it's a case of 2 women, they're not going to get that masculine strength and that masculine leadership that comes from only men, what men can give. And 2 men are not going to be able to give the children the proper tenderness, care, and maternal needs that the mother can bring. So we really need to be vigilant and reject all these new experiments. Cannot ever call them conservative, and just guard against this kind of error. Well, hope that's been helpful. We'll talk to you next week on another edition of Christian Answers. God bless.